What's the best way to figure out what fonts are used in a document? Well, one way is to use Bridge. Most people don't know that you can find a list of all the fonts in a document in Bridge's metadata panel. Let me show you. I have a separate document I've created here called Java Code Sheet Find Font, and when I click on that and look in the metadata panel down here, we can see a list of all the fonts in my document. Jensen and Minion and so on. There's also some font called Polaroid, and then there's Times Roman. I happen to know that Times Roman actually is not used in this document. For some reason, Bridge always says that Times is used in a document, in InDesign documents, and even if you don't use it, it still shows up here. It's really kind of annoying. So ignore that one, but we do know that those fonts are there. So okay, knowing what fonts in a document is nice, I suppose, but it doesn't really help us change them. For that, you need InDesign's Find Font dialog box. To get to Find Font, I'm going to open up this document by double-clicking on it in Bridge. Now sometimes when you open a document, you see a dialog box like this one that says Missing Fonts. This says that one or more fonts in the document isn't on this current system. It's not on my machine. So what do you want to do about it? One option is to go directly to Find Font, and that'll open the Find Font dialog box. But instead, I'm going to click OK to basically ignore that because I want to show you how to go to Find Font manually. It's up here in the Type menu. Just choose Find Font. The Find Font dialog box shows you all the fonts that are used in a document. There's the Polaroid and the Jensen Pro and Minion and so on, but even better, it lets you find them. For example, what is that font and where is it specified in this document? I select it, and I can see that there's a little alert symbol there saying that this is missing, and then I click Find First. That selects the first instance of that font in my document, which I can see down here. I'm going to close this dialog box and zoom in by pressing Command 4 or Control 4 on Windows, and I can see what's highlighted. Oh, it's just these invisible characters. It looks like a space character, and then the character turn at the end of the paragraph. I find this a lot in documents that people send me, just stray characters that have some random font assigned to them. So what do I do about it? Well, I could select those characters and just change them in the Control panel, but in this case, I'm going to go to the Type menu and choose Find Font, and I'll select it here, and then I'll type in a font that I want it to be set to. In this case, it'll be Minion Pro, so I type MIN to get Minion, hit the down arrow to go to Minion Pro, and then I can click Change All. The reason I like this technique is because I know that it'll change the entire document, no matter how many times this Polaroid font snuck in there. Click Change All, and it says overrides have been applied to one or more styles. Well, this is interesting, but I'm going to hold off on talking about styles and overrides until the chapter on styles. In this case, I'm going to say, it looks interesting, click OK, and move on. I don't really need to worry about that typically. Now let's do it to this next font, Adobe Jensen. I didn't mean for that to be in this document either, so I'm going to jump down to the font family, little shortcut. You can just hit the Tab key to jump to font family, and I'll type the same thing, Minion Pro, regular, and this time I want to make sure, there it is, it's already turned on for me, that's good. Redefine style when changing all. This is a new feature in CS3, and it's very, very helpful. When this is on, InDesign will actually go in and change all the paragraph style definitions as well. Again, I'm going to hold off on paragraph styles and character style discussion until another chapter, but it's important to know that this will change all the style definitions as well as the fonts that are on the document pages itself. So I like that feature very much. I'll click Change All, and I can see the overrides have been applied. No problem, I'll click OK, and we can now see that just the fonts I wanted, Minion and Myriad, those are the only fonts that I wanted in this document, so all is well and good. By the way, this will also show you fonts that are in graphics. For example, if you import a PDF file that uses a particular font, if that font is missing or OK, it'll actually show it here in in this list as well. So not just fonts you've used in the InDesign document, but also imported graphics. One other thing that's kind of interesting about this is this More Info button. This is a little tweaky. Most of you will never need to look at this stuff, but it's kind of interesting. If I select a font here, I can get all kinds of information about that font that's been used here, including what styles it was used in, how many characters it's been applied to in this document, stuff like that. It's kind of interesting. In general, I like to make it a practice to open the Find Font dialog box and just to see what fonts have been used in a document before I finish it and send it off to the printer. You'd be surprised how often other fonts sneak in there. In the last chapter, we talked about formatting that you can apply to individual characters, such as font size and so on. Now let's get into formatting you apply to an entire paragraph. I'm going to change the formatting of this text down here. So double click on a tool, which switches to the type tool. I'll press Command 2 to jump to 200% view, or that's Control 2 on Windows. I'll scroll over so we can see it a little bit better. Now I want to change the paragraph formatting, so I'm going to click on the paragraph icon in the control panel. Remember, there's the character formatting button and the paragraph formatting button. If your screen is wide enough, you might be seeing both character and paragraph formatting at the same time in the control panel. In that case, these two buttons will simply control which formatting shows up on the left side of the control panel. The first thing I'm going to point out is the alignment buttons, way over here on the left. And by default, these paragraphs are set to left align, also called flush left, in which the left line is flush with the left edge of the frame, and the right side of the paragraphs are ragged. The second alignment you can use is center alignment, which of course centers every line of the paragraph. By the way, note what's going on here. This cursor is simply flashing in this text over here. I didn't have to select the entire paragraph in order to apply the paragraph formatting. I could simply click in it or select one or more characters in there, and still all the paragraph formatting will be applied to the entire paragraph. Flush right, or a right align, of course, aligns along the right edge of the frame and has a left rag. I'm going to skip over these two for a moment and go down to these three icons, which all have to do with justified text. In justified text, every line of the paragraph is flush on the left and the right, except for the last line. And the three justified options here are left align justified, center align justified, and force justified. And those all have to do with what happens on the last line of the document. Again, with the left line justified, every line is flush except for the last line. This one, justified center, the last line is centered. And the last one, they're all justified. Every line is forced from the left side to the right side. So what about these two buttons on the right side here? These have to do with facing pages documents, like a book or a magazine, in which there's a spine. And this is a line toward the spine, and this is a line away from the spine. That way you can have a single paragraph that changes its alignment depending on whether it's a left page or a right page. In this case, we're not worried about that, so I'm going to go back to my regular left alignment. Now let's move over here to our indents. The first field is left indent, and I can change this left indent to, let's say, quarter inches, 0.25 IN, hit enter, and as we've learned before, if you change the measurement system, it'll change right back for us. It'll do the calculation, in this case, to picas, and we can see that the left indent of this paragraph has been moved over a quarter inch. Right indent is over next to it, and that does the same thing, but from the right side. We can change this value to anything we want. In this case, I could use my arrow keys to simply go 1 point at a time, or remember, hold on the Shift key to get larger increments. And you can see that it's actually forcing the right indent over some. We can't see that line. It's sort of an invisible line beyond which the text cannot run. Now this field over here, with this mysterious icon, is the first line indent. The first line indent only affects the indent on the first line. For example, if you wanted the first line of this paragraph to be indented slightly, don't just press a bunch of spaces or hit a tab character to indent it. Instead, use the feature that's built in. Use first line indent. I'll change this to, let's say, 1 pica 6. Hit enter, and you can see that that first line got indented exactly the amount I wanted it without any muss or fuss. This last field here is the last line right indent, and it's sort of the opposite of the first line indent. This feature down here is the last line right indent, and it's sort of the opposite of the first line left indent. It only controls the last line of a paragraph, which in this case isn't going to help us at all. Now, look at these paragraphs. There's space between them. Did someone go in and type 2 character turns in order to get that space? No, absolutely not. Why? Because there's a fundamental rule of desktop publishing that says never type the same invisible character twice. That means you shouldn't type 2 spaces in a row, or 2 paragraph returns in a row, or even 2 tabs in a row. So what do you do if you want to have extra space between paragraphs? You should use the feature that's built into InDesign, space before and space after. And that's what these two features are up here in the middle of the control panel. Space before controls space before this particular paragraph, and space after is the space after. And you can see that if I select these paragraphs, they all have space after of 9 points. If I change that to 0 and hit enter, you'll see now there's no space between the paragraphs. If I change it to larger, and I could use the arrow keys, or I'm just going to click on these little buttons. All these fields that have these little buttons here let you click on them to do little increments, or again shift click to do larger increments. You can see that this adds space after each paragraph. I can get a very similar effect here by pressing 0 to zero out that space after, and instead, I'm going to apply space before just to those paragraphs. There you go. You get the same thing, either before this paragraph or after this paragraph. It doesn't really matter. So alignments, indents, spacing, this is just a drop in the bucket. In the next few movies, we'll look at creating drop caps, adjusting hyphenation, justification, and far more. Much of the art of design revolves around drawing the eye to where you want the reader to go, and one of the best ways to draw the eye to the beginning of a story or a section is with a drop cap. InDesign lets you easily apply a drop cap to any paragraph, and even automatically change that drop cap styling. The most direct to a drop cap is the control panel. So I'm going to apply a drop cap to this first paragraph here, so I need to select that paragraph. I'll double-click with the selection tool to switch to the type tool, and then I will zoom into 400% mode by pressing Command 4 or Control 4 on Windows. I'll scroll over here so we can see this a little bit better, and I want to change that A to be a drop cap. Drop caps are paragraph formatting, so in the control panel I need to click on the paragraph button. And now I go over here and I look at these two fields here. This is the drop cap lines and the drop cap number of characters field. Let's look at each of those. Right now, the number of lines is set to 0. If I set it to 1, nothing happens. Why? Because 0 and 1 with a drop cap is basically the same thing. But as soon as I change it to 2, which I'm using the arrow keys on my keyboard, as soon as I change it to 2, you can see that suddenly I have a drop cap. And if I change it to 3, now I'm getting a significant drop cap. The field to the right is the number of characters that are going to be in the drop cap. Right now it's 1, but if I increase this to 2 or 3 or 4, you can see that I'm getting more characters in my drop cap, right? I'm going to set this back down to 1, so I just want that A to be in my drop cap. Now if that's all you want from your drop cap, then great, we're done. It's good enough. But InDesign gives you more drop cap control as well, and in order to get that control, you need to go to the Control Panel flyout menu and choose Drop Caps and Nested Styles, or press Command-Option-R or Control-Alt-R on Windows, or use my favorite feature, which is Option-Click or Alt-Click on Windows brings up the Drop Caps and Nested Styles dialog box. Now, I'm going to hold off on talking about nested styles until the next chapter, but for right now, I'm going to focus just on drop caps. I'll move this out of the way so we can see better. You can see that the lines and characters reflect the same features up here in the control panel. But let me talk about Align Left Edge and Scale for Descenders for a moment. Align Left Edge, which is new in CS3, lets us control a little problem that sometimes happens with some fonts. See that little space between the edge of the frame and the A? We can get rid of that by turning on Align Left Edge. I have the preview checkbox turned on so I can actually see it move over. Now the left edge of the A is right perfectly aligned with the edge of the frame or the edge of the paragraph indent. So that sometimes helps. Scale for Descenders, I can't show you this feature until I change it to a different character, so let me click OK and change this to a Q. And a Q, you can see the descender of the Q is bouncing into the ascender of this D, which looks really ugly. So in this case, I'll option click on the button up here, which brings up the dialog box, and here I'm going to turn on Scale for Descenders, and when that's on, you see that it automatically scales the character down so it doesn't bounce in to the character underneath. Now, it's smart enough to know that with A, it doesn't matter if that's on or off. It won't scale an A down, it only scales it down if there's a descender character. Now, this is looking pretty good, except for one thing. It seems like every time I make a drop cap, I want to change the styling. I want to make it bold, or change the font, or make a different size, or something like that. And in InDesign, you can do all of that automatically if you've set up a character style. I'll option click on the button one more time, or alt click on Windows, and I'm going to choose it from the Character Style pop-up menu. Now, I don't talk about how to create character styles until the next chapter on styles, but for right now, we've simply created a character style in this document already called drop cap, and I'm going to choose that. And look what happens. Boom. All of a sudden, all the styling changed just for the drop cap. The font changed, it added a squash automatically, it could change the size, the color, it could change any of those things simply by changing the character style here. I'll click OK, and I'm going to show you one more drop cap feature, which is important for a lot of people, and that has to do with how do you control the amount of space between the drop cap and all of these lines over here. And you know what? It's really easy. It's all about kerning. Simply place the cursor between the drop cap and the second character here, switch back to the character formatting mode of the control panel, and then change your kerning value. I'll change this kerning value from 0 to, let's say, I'll just go up with the arrow keys here, up or down, and you can see that all three of those lines are being affected, so I can move it really close to the drop cap or farther away from the drop cap. You have a lot of control. You know, you can create all kinds of interesting typographic effects with drop caps. Let your imagination go wild.